back with my handy dandy notebook. I just watched the new season of The Ultimatum. And I will say, I did watch that first season when it came out. I don't know, was it 2 years ago at this point almost? And I'm not going to lie, y'all, that first season, like, had me a little bit triggered. So I was like, I'm going to watch Ultimatum. I didn't know if I would want to talk about the people on that show. But after I watched it, I'm like, oh yeah, we got to talk about this. We got to talk about some very specific things today. I also want to give this, like, not a disclaimer, but, like, I want to share an awareness I have that I hope a lot of you have too, is that the show's premise is goofy. Like, obviously we know that. And there's also, I feel like, an element of, like, how many of these people really were about to issue somebody an ultimatum before they found out the show was going to be filming near them. Like, so there's, like, an aspect of it where I'm like, okay, like, there's a person who wants to get married and the person who doesn't, but, like, really, though, like, was there really going to be an ultimatum? Especially with somebody like Antonio, but we'll get into that when we talk about that couple. So, yeah, if you want to hear how I feel about all these people, I'll probably start with the couple who stayed the shortest amount of time because allegedly someone became pregnant, and that's Lisa and Brian. So, yeah, let's hop into it. All right, so let's talk about Lisa before we talk about her and Brian as a unit, because there's a lot less to say about Brian specifically. Lisa is this person where maybe some of us women are like this, or maybe we know a woman like this, where as we got to know her, she thought, oh, if I aspire like really hard and go hard on my career or my education, and I like cutesy myself up on top of that, every man's gonna want to marry me. Like, I'm a man's dream now. I'll challenge a man. Like, it'll be challenging for him. I think her issue is she never stopped and either asked Brian or just asked men in general what they desire in a woman. Every person desires something different, obviously. But as a general rule of thumb, I'm not a man. So I'm just going off of what I've heard from literal men. But I think if you ask a man what he looks for in a woman or in a wife in this scenario, I don't think the very first thing he's going to say is that he wants someone who challenges him. And I don't mean that he doesn't want a woman who isn't intelligent, but you can be intelligent and that can be a beautiful part of your relationship that you can share with someone, but that doesn't inherently mean that they're being challenged. So she obviously feels this way about herself because, like, we'll just fast forward to that only scene that really matters with them since they were only on the show for 3 minutes. When they're having that cocktail hour and everyone's mingling like you're supposed to do on this show, literally the premise of the show that she invited her boyfriend to do. She gave the ultimatum. He's talking to this other woman. What's her name? Freaking Riah. He's talking to Riah. At this point, we know hardly anything about Riah, but from what we're seeing on the screen, she's, you know, getting her flirt on because that's what they're supposed to be doing, but she's being pretty respectful, I would think, of their relationship. Brian is as well. They're just getting to know each other. Clearly, there was an attraction there. It's the premise of the show. Like, I don't know what Lisa was upset about. But the childishness of interrupting their conversation, she has like these little tactics that she does. Like, I'll bounce back for a second when they showed that clip of her crying the night before they do the breakup, crying in bed. And she's like, I just want to go home. I think all of these things she was doing was just a series of tactics to convince him to not want to be a part of it anymore, because she regretted it the moment they got there and she realized there was a newer model for him to kind of explore. And I don't say that from my own view. I think that was her view of Riah, being a younger woman, being someone who like is just younger and like, you know, like itsy bitsy, whatever. So fast forward back to their encounter at the bar, where she kind of messes up Brian and Riah's conversation as they're getting to know each other as potential like trial marriage. And then I'll say this right now. I think the double standard still exists, even though people try to claim that women are being held more accountable nowadays. Men are, I think, more targeted when it comes to abuse and putting their hands on people, because when a man puts his hand on you, he's going to hurt you, and it may go beyond that. When a woman does it, it can reach those extents too, but I think there's an element of, oh, it's just a woman, like, you know, she just like, it didn't do anything. But there's two elements of it too when she did what she did and hit him in the face. And some people want to say, like, oh, it wasn't a slap. Just because she hit him and her hand mushed him doesn't mean it wasn't a slap. It was a slap. Ooh. And it was a mush. It was like double bad. So she slaps him. I had to rewind it because I was in utter shock. And then to see that she did this in front of everyone else. So not only did she want to like put that energy onto him, but she also was trying to humiliate him and create this terrible experience for him, because what's he gonna do back? And then to see the part where they go into the parking lot, it literally broke my heart for the first words out of her mouth to be, oh, well, what do you want from that? Calling Riah a when she knew absolutely nothing about her except for the fact that she worked at Hooters. She's a 24-year-old. She works at Hooters. And from what I could tell from how she acted from the remainder of the show, Riah, she's a respectable girl who's just trying to find her way. That goes back to my original thought about Lisa and what she thought she had to do to get a man. And then coming to that realization where she was like, oh, dang, all it really took for Brian or my man to be interested in someone else is that she was cute and nice and sweet. So you got that a lot. And I started to feel that even before she eventually says to him while she's cursing him out in the parking lot, she goes, how's she going to challenge you? What's she going to teach you? How's she going to challenge you? And I'm like, girl, I think he's had enough challenging for the rest of his life. Brian, all I had to really say about him is that based on the kind of energy he was giving Riah, again, from their very brief encounters, he strikes me as someone who will eventually get married, but he is a spinning example of what people say of, well, if he says he doesn't want to get married, he's saying he doesn't want to marry you. Like, that is definitely the energy I get between him and Lisa. He's just waiting for the right woman, and Lisa's a good enough placeholder for him. That's not my personal impression. I'm sure Lisa could go and find someone who would really appreciate her. But when you're coming to a man with such a level of desperation, and then honestly, she was a little condescending to him at a point too, because when they had their night before they had the dates at the pool, she said to him, she was like, well, I'm looking for a man who does this, and maybe we're like, I'm just on a different level. Her and Roxanne have done that, and I'm just like, girl, if that's how you genuinely feel, one, saying that to him is not going to make him feel good. It's just going to make him feel minimized and like crap. And if that's how you feel, then go get the man who's at your level. Don't go get the man, but let that man come to you. I truly don't understand the dynamic here. When it comes to their pregnancy conversation, I would never want to speak on someone's like personal bodily autonomy. But when we found out she was pregnant, and when she tells him she's pregnant, I was just like, okay, I'll wait to see pictures of the baby. That's all I'm gonna say. Like, I'll wait to see pictures of the baby. Not saying I don't believe her, not saying I do believe her, but I'm saying it is rather convenient. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about Riah and Trey. So the first thing I had to write down about Riah, of course, is one thing about her, she's gonna cry. That girl, I believe that she cried in every scene that she had with Trey. I don't understand it. Now, of course, she wasn't boo-hooing, but I'm just like, girl, like, you gotta cry at everything. But I'm not even faulting her for that, because your girl can shed a tear over small things. And that just may mean that she's in tune with her emotions, because it wasn't like she was blubbering. She was just expressing her discontent for a lot of things. So I can understand that. I knew that Ryan and Trey were just not a match when I got a full picture of what their dynamic was before they came on the show. He was 28 at the time of filming. She was 24. They had been living together. They didn't say how long in their relationship that they had been living together, but it very much gave me the impression of, oh, this is a convenience relationship. Y'all get along well enough. Let's be honest, they're both bland enough and just kind of like walking through life, for my impression, that I'm like, either of them could date anybody. So I think it was a scenario of, I don't know if he moved her into his spot or if they got a place together, and it just kind of like went on and on and on. But from their very first conversation, she talks about how most of their relationship has not been like sunshine and rainbows. And then on top of that, Trey gives me the impression that he will marry anybody who is sweet and subtle and petite. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do think he is very like, what is the word? I'm trying to, not fluid, but fluid in a way where Trey is just so much of a blank slate and just so like Labrador Retriever-y, like golden retriever, that he can just make it work with anybody. Because I feel like that was the same effect with Ryan. Both Ryan and Riah are very like they keep their tone very calm. So I think he just wants a woman who's sweet and quiet and will move to the country with him. What I really like about Riah is that of all people on this show, I would say she would get the award for clearest communicator. From the first conversation I saw her have with Trey, when she met Brian and talked to him for a bit, when she was even confronting her trial marriage with, what's his name? James. She made a point to be very clear about how she felt. I felt like she was the least passive-aggressive person on this show. She was very clear about how she felt, and we eventually get to like the root of the problem, which this is what annoyed me about this show. There were a couple instances here where I'm like, okay, y'all waited till like the last episode to really say what the disconnect was. For Riah and Trey, they just made it seem like Riah just didn't know if she wanted to be married. But then we find out she would probably like to be married. She would like to probably have kids. But they have a weird sexual dynamic. Like their sex isn't really doing what it needs to do. And then what was the other issue? That she wants to like move to Atlanta, but he specifically doesn't want to move to Atlanta. And I will say, I'm kind of jumping all around, but towards the end when Trey and Riah get back together and they're talking about how she doesn't want to have long distance for even a year, he was like, well, I don't understand why you would give up a lifetime just for a year to explore or whatever. And in my head, I'm like, Trey, that argument doesn't make any sense, because you could very easily conversely respond to that and be like, well, I don't understand why you would give up a lifetime with me for not just doing something fun for a year or trying something new for a year. The argument was so stupid to me, and I just feel like Trey and Riah are both in very immature states, and I don't mean that in an offensive way. I think they're both cool, normal people, but I think they're just mentally immature and don't really have the full capacity to understand why they would even want to be married. I'm like, Trey, like, every person who issued an ultimatum, I'm like, you don't seem like you actually want to be married to this person. And the fact that you like admitted your feelings for Ryan, I'm like, I also feel that Trey is he's not very good at reading the room or reading what's happening right in front of him. Because when he said to Ryan, his trial wife, like, I'm getting feelings for you, and just her reaction alone, I'm like, dude, can you not read the room that she's just like going with the motions until she goes back to her man? Like, I don't understand. Oh, so about the sexual issue, I literally like was looking side to side for two reasons. One, when she was with James, her trial husband, and then she was like, oh, what's foreplay? And I guess she was being like, you know, having like the sarcasm to it, because she's basically trying to say like she doesn't get to experience that. But I was just like, okay, that's interesting. And then, did y'all clock when, like, they met up with, I think it was her sister or her cousin, I'm not sure. I think it was her sister. And then her sister was like, oh, yeah, she doesn't get wet. I was just like, I need to turn the TV off. Okay, now let's talk about Machine Gun Kelly and Megan Fox. Or better known as Roxanne and Antonio. So, we all know that they're a hot mess. Like, we don't even have to talk about, like, oh, do they belong together? I wanted to talk about how I viewed them as individuals and the kind of dynamic they've created, where I think that we could probably all agree Roxanne is definitely the toxic person in this scenario, and she projects her insecurities onto Antonio. And just like Alex said, Roxanne's trial husband, she uses Antonio as her whipping boy, and it is in fact true. Like, she talked terrible about him any chance that she could get. I wrote about Roxanne. There's a true self to her, and then there's an aspirational self. True self and aspirational self. So she wants to be this career woman. She challenges men, and okay, girl, we got it. Like, we got your whole vibe. But I wrote that she's hypercritical of everyone else. Like, she can so easily sit a girl down. She could sit with Kat and like say, oh, Kat, you need better, because this is how I've psychoanalyzed your man that I've been with for 3 weeks, that I barely talk to because we work all the time. But she's not self-reflective. And I'm going to talk about how Antonio is the exact opposite. I actually like Antonio. I'll explain why. I just like him as a person. But Antonio is super self-reflective. He thinks about how, he even says to the guys when they go out, he's like, I'm one of the most selfish people you'll ever meet. which inherently is not a great trait, but I like that he's honest. And he displays, like, I think everyone downplays their selfishness, because let's be totally honest, I think Roxanne is more selfish than Antonio. I think she can't admit it to herself. But Antonio, he goes out of his way for other people. He's very self-reflective in ways that he can improve himself. So yeah, I would actually challenge him on that thought process. But getting back to Roxanne, she's hypercritical, but she's not very self-reflective, because this is my thought process. You can sit Antonio down and say, oh, like, when are you going to be a businessman? And when are you going to be an entrepreneur? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, Roxanne, Antonio said to one of the women at the pool, I didn't miss this, I don't know if y'all did. He said, when Roxanne met me, I worked at McDonald's. So Roxanne, if you know what you want and you know you need a certain type of man of a certain type of caliber, why were you dating this man when he was working at McDonald's? So it seems like, Roxanne, you need to clearly prioritize what you want and be more honest with yourself. I think Antonio's good. He knew when he met you he wanted you. You clearly wanted him, but now you're selling him this different story. I can totally see why Antonio would be frustrated and confused and always scared of losing Roxanne, when he probably is thinking to himself, well, you hung out with me and like got with me when I was working at McDonald's, so why suddenly is it an issue now? And it's because now she's like, oh dang, I actually have feelings for this dude and I like him, but I can't justify keeping him in my life because I'm I'm shallow, and I think money is the only thing that matters instead of somebody who cares for me and expresses love for me. So now I gotta pretend like I have these high standards. I'm like, girl, where were these high standards at when you started dating him working at McDonald's? And I'm not shaming him for working at McDonald's. She's the one who decided to get with him. He didn't make her do that. The point I'm trying to make there is that she constantly hounds Antonio for having poor judgment and being immature, but I'm just like, this is the part where I think she's projecting, because I'm like, well, who actually has the poor judgment here? Because Antonio seems very clear in the things that he wants and who he is. It's you that doesn't. And also, she just can't take accountability for things, because when Alex called her out, she tried to confront him for talking trash to Antonio when him and Antonio were at the bar talking about things. But he was like, well, you don't respect Antonio and you do treat him like a whipping boy. And she could not take that. She couldn't be accountable for it. And although we'll talk about Alex and how that is not the type of man that I think most women would want to be with, I think we can all agree with the fact that he was correct. If y'all were watching it alongside me in spirit, you probably chuckled or like giggled or like shook your head when every time someone would tell Antonio the truth, or like say like, this person said this about you, he would like have his like B-roll moment, or he would have his response to the person be like, they didn't say that. You're like, there at one point, he even, when Roxanne said how she felt about something in his like cutaway interview, he goes, yeah, Roxanne was lying when she said this, that she felt this way. And then I'm sure me, I'm sure y'all are all watching that like, Antonio, are you like delusional? Like, why are you? He did that about Alex when Alex claimed that Roxanne talks bad about him, and he said that to Kat when Kat told him that Alex's parents also said the same thing. He was like, well, they're all lying. It's like a conspiracy. I'm like, dude. But I think the reason why he reacts this way is because I do think that Antonio tries to be as transparent as possible, and he's young. And I think that he can't reckon with the fact that other people are not like that. You're dealing with people who are a little bit more snaky than you, or a lot more snaky than you. So I don't think he's doing it because he's trying to necessarily manipulate the situation. He's manipulating it in his own head because he can't accept that other people aren't as honest and forthright as him. Oh, and then I'll end with this about them. So I really like this thing that Antonio said to Roxanne the night before they split, before they have to decide if they're gonna like get married or whatever, or get engaged. And he said to her, if this was the last time you were ever going to see me, what would you say to me? And I was like, oh. And one thing I liked about Antonio this whole season is he asked the real questions. I think he even said to Alex at the bar when they were like going back and forth, he was like, are you not being totally forthright and just talking because you're trying to spare me, or you're trying to spare yourself? And every time Antonio talks, I'm like snaps for Antonio, like it's like a poetry slam. Because I think he has some depth to him. He's obviously immature, y'all. Like, he can't accept the truth for anything. But I think he has a depth to him that as he matures and gets older and finds a woman who actually respects him and cares for him like he cares for her, then he can be more successful, and that could bring the best out of him. Oh, and I can't believe I almost forgot this. So I guess you can't call it a Freudian slip because Freud has to do with like the weird like sexual whatever. I don't know. But Roxanne definitely had that slip up when they're at the table and he says, I love you. And then she doesn't respond and they're going back and forth. And she's like, well, I'm not going to say something I don't mean. I'm like, Antonio, she literally just told you she does not love you. And she tried to clean it up with the whole, I just mean in this moment. And I was y'all, let's all send a collective prayer up for Antonio that he can get his life, okay? Okay, just 2 more couples, y'all, and I saved the most boring ones for last. So we're gonna talk about Kat and Alex, and the only things I really have to say about Kat is I think back to when her and Antonio, her trial husband, were on a picnic, and he was like, well, I don't really feel like you know who you are, like, which I feel like can be a bit of a cringe thing to say to someone you've only known for a few weeks, but to each his own. And I kind of felt that way too when he said it. But then the moment Kat and Roxanne had their little sit down at the sushi bar that night, and Roxanne was like, oh, you deserve better than Alex, and Alex was like this and that, and Kat was like, oh yeah, and then immediately backtracked and made it all seem like it was BS afterwards when she talked with Antonio. I was like, okay, so Kat knows exactly who she is. She just knows that she plays whatever side of the fence will get her the desired result in that moment. A lot of these people on this show this year, they all give me very fluid energy and not in a positive way. They give me, they can just meld themselves and mold themselves to be whatever everyone else needs for them to be in that scenario. Which totally makes sense with the fact that she dates Alex, because I'm like, why are they together? There doesn't seem to be chemistry. Alex looks like he's tolerating her every time she talks, like this tolerating her. And I had to come to realize that Alex is so intolerable himself that Kat is perfect for him because she's probably one of the few women who will just completely denigrate and just allow herself to be minimized for the benefit of Alex, which I'm like, girl, I know Kat can see him because she opens her eyes wide as can be. I'm like, you see what Alex looks like. He's not anything you can't find anywhere. And I forgot to say this earlier, y'all, but this show is filmed in Charlotte, if you didn't know, and I'm from the Carolinas, and I'm telling you, like, I can tell you there's 20 Alexes that were just like that and who looked just like that I went to high school with. So same for every person on this show, actually. I'm like, the cast this season was so bland because there's carbon copies of them anywhere in North and South Carolina. I will tell you that. Kat just gave me like this begging energy, just like this desire. And maybe it's because she just always had this concerned, furrowed brow look on her face. So maybe it just translated that way to me. But I never got to know who Kat was. I don't know. I couldn't even tell you anything about her personality, to be totally honest, except for the fact that her personality is, I want to be married. Oh, the only other thing about Kat is her friends are unbelievably obnoxious. There's something to say, and I do feel like this is a thing. Oh, I'll make this point now. When Kat and her friends were at that like bar, and then Alex came and they're kind of interrogating him, like, oh, are you gonna marry Kat? Have you decided if she's the one? I don't know if y'all have noticed, but they rarely let him get a word out. They would ask him 4 questions rapid fire, 4 different questions, and then not even give him the chance to speak. Not that Alex is really going to say much of anything anyway, but I'm like, allow the man to get a word out. And I'll say this too about, it wasn't every woman on the show, but it was like, you got to allow, if you're going to ask a man all these questions, a telltale sign that y'all are not a match is if he can't even have a conversation with you. Like, there were so many times where these women would just talk and say valid things, and the men would just not respond. They'd be like, how disrespectful is that? And then on top of that, it's the whole, I heard this quote recently. It wasn't really a quote. I just heard someone talking about it online, and they were saying, like, the person who says the least amount of words in the room has the most power. I do feel like that's applicable to almost every single scenario. Like, you probably hear from people who are like, if you want to show your confidence, like, don't blubber on. Don't use a lot of filler words. Like, take out the fillers. And although I think some of these men use that whole premise as a scapegoat when really they just don't want to talk to you, period. I'm not talking about that. But I am talking about the fact that these women who are very intelligent and self-aware and reflective, most of them, you don't have to say so much to get your point across. I guarantee you these men know exactly what you're meaning and saying, probably the 100 other times you said it to them when they weren't listening then. They didn't care. Just like Kat said to Alex the night before they split up for their trial marriages, he was like, well, yeah, and I know this is, I just think we need to be more clear about it. And then Kat was like, well, yeah, this is stuff I've been saying to you like many, many times. And she said it in this passive way where you could easily miss it. But I think that's something for a lot of women to take with them is you don't have to keep adding words because the man isn't saying anything. He's either not saying anything because he already is understanding what you're saying, y'all just aren't on the same page, or he's not saying anything because he doesn't care and he's not listening. So I'm telling a woman in the room, you will be, I'm saying this to myself too, you will be a more powerful force and more respected if you say your point and let it stand. You don't have to ask for questions rapid fire. You don't have to rephrase things because you didn't get the answer that you like. These are grown men. These are not children. And the moment you stop treating them like they're children, you'll either find out, oh, dang, if they're really that immature, or two, that y'all just aren't a good match. So that was a long rant about that. Oh my God. With Alex, I just wanted to say, I've mentioned him a few times already now, but I thought it was super disrespectful, and I think he knew it when they were at the, what is it called? The change, or I don't know the names they use for these stupid parts of the show. But when they're all at that table picking their trial husband and wife, and he goes, Roxanne is like the complete opposite of Kat. She's intelligent and like ambitious, and he like lists out all these qualities, and I was like, you're a douchebag. But then Kat just sits there with this blank look on her face, and I don't know if Kat is not that bright or if she just has no self-esteem. I genuinely can't tell. Maybe y'all have a better idea than me. Oh, this is what I wrote about Alex. So I said that he pretends to care about being super logical and pragmatic, but in reality, he's just avoidant. And I y'all probably know a lot of people like this. I know a lot of men like this as well, who they act like, well, I got to think about this and calculate the function of X, Y, and Z. And it's like, but then somebody will ask you like, do you love your girlfriend? And they're like, and they use the logic trap to like get out of answering something that just has to do with being a human. I get very concerned about people who are overly pathological or very logical instead of just being a human, having human emotions. A big part of being human has to do with how you express yourself. And you can't really express yourself through I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but you can't really express yourself through logic. All you can do is come to conclusions from logic. So it's like there's a whole aspect of this man's personality that's not existing because he refuses to be upfront and communicate well. It's extremely frustrating. And that's all I really have to say about the two of them. So yeah, let's move on to our last. All right, we're on our last couple, y'all. We are in the home stretch. So this last couple is Ryann and James. And I forgot to say about Alex when I was talking about him, but I will say it now because we're talking about James too. I don't want to mentally diagnose anybody, but James and Alex definitely, let's just say, if they were really angry and no one knew we were like in a cabin in Tennessee together, like I wouldn't want to be in that scenario. If you can catch my drift. I'm just saying, that's just my impression. Y'all tell me what you think. So about Ryann, like not much to say here. This part should be very short. Ryann's a sweet, bland South Carolina girl. Like she's sweet, and I don't mean that in a passive way. She is sweet. She seems very nice. She seems like she'll be a great wife to someone. She seems like she'll be a nice enough mom, but not much substance to work with, I felt like. The only other thing I'll say about her is she seemed to avoid eye contact a lot when she would talk to people. Like she would be having conversations. When she had her trial marriage with Trey, he would be staring directly at her and she'd be like looking off to the side. I'm like, are you okay? Like, are you scared to look at people? When it came to James, all I could think is, how were y'all in a 7-year relationship and has never had a deep conversation? Now, I know you can't really count. I would say like the first 2 to 3 years of that because you started dating when you were 16. Y'all were literally children. So, okay, how deep is it really going to go? And I don't know what the whole, something tells me they've been like long distance or something. They never say that, but I'm thinking with him going to college, with her, I don't know if she went to school, but they're probably like not seeing each other enough to ever have that really deep connection. And I'm like, what does it take to stay in a relationship for 7 years? Comfort, familiarity, safety, security. Like, that's all I'm getting from that. Because again, these people, you can find them anywhere. Like, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but these people are just all like generic brand individuals. They're all great value people. There's nothing that mean to say. They're just not offering much to talk about. After he shared his background of how he used to self-harm, which is not a joking matter at all, especially to the extent that he shared, I'm like, dude, if I were her, I'd be like, yeah, we definitely don't need to get married. If I were Ryan, I'd be like, let's talk about what do you think therapy might look like for both of us, or maybe for you, or do you think you need to have this conversation with other people before you feel like you're ready to explore things deeper? We're talking about marriage here, y'all. And this person is just now telling the girl he's dated for almost a decade of his life that he's self-harmed. Like, that's a serious topic. I feel like one thing else I'll say is people, again with the fluidity, people all want to give a certain affect off when they're dealing with people and like want to make a good impression. James was acting like a good old Southern boy the whole time he was with Riah, even though he was like dismissive of her and wouldn't like give her affection, whatever, or just be straight up with her. But they show that clip of him and Ryan arguing late at night on the security cam, cursing up a storm, cursing her out. Well, what the boop, 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 just bleeping out everything he's saying. And I'm like, I hadn't heard James say a curse word this entire season, but suddenly he got the smoke for his girlfriend. I just think it's very fascinating. People should take more into account when it comes to cursing as well. And I do curse in my like daily lingo, but I try to make it a point where if I'm dating someone or if I'm in a relationship with someone, I'm not cursing at you. We're not doing that. To me, that's no different than if y'all are having a screaming match. Why are you saying curse words at me while we're having a conversation? So it shows a different layer, I think, of him that he doesn't really want people to see. I think there's a whole element to James that he doesn't want anyone to see, like a very dark side. That's all I'm going to say about them, because I think their relationship is a moot point. But I will also add that his mom, like, kind of made me, like, I was like, am I going to be in trouble when I watched her on the screen? She is intimidating. Like, not to say I get why he did the things that he did that he told Ryan about, but I'm like, ooh, I can't even imagine like growing up in a household with that woman, because she seemed very intense is the word I'll use. So that's it for, I think it was episodes 1 through 8 or 1 through 9. I think they'll have their decision day, which I don't even know if I'll make a video with that. I mean, like, there's nothing really to talk about. People are going to make decisions. None of them should be together, blah, 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 blah. And then they'll have a reunion. The only way I might talk about the reunion is if Brian and or Lisa decide to show up, and I better see a baby, because I know they filmed that show over a year ago. So let me know what y'all thought of the show below. Make sure to subscribe. Let me know what you thought about all the people on the show as well, because one of my favorite parts about making videos is seeing the comments that you all leave. So get to it. Okay, y'all, have a great day. Bye.